Welcome to Tabernacle Talks, the podcast where we gather to explore the heart and soul of Collinsville Baptist Tabernacle. I'm your host, Pastor Gary Boyd, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for these insightful conversations. Each episode, Tabernacle Talks delves into stories, teachings, and experiences that shape our faith community. We bring you interviews and discussions with our fellow church members, leaders, and special guests who share a deep connection with the Collinsville Baptist Tabernacle. From the comfort of your homes, cars, or wherever you're listening, we invite you to embark on a journey of faith, discovery, and community. Together, we'll explore a wide range of topics that are of significance to our church family. We'll delve into Scripture, seeking wisdom and insight for our daily lives. We'll hear stories of transformation, faith journeys, and the powerful ways God is working in the lives of our fellow believers. In each episode, we'll also discuss practical ways we can live out our faith, serving our community and making a positive impact in the world around us. We hope to inspire and equip you to live a life filled with purpose and devotion. So, whether you're a longtime member of Collinsville Baptist Tabernacle or a new visitor seeking spiritual nourishment, Tabernacle Talks is here to encourage, uplift, and connect us all. Join us as we gather around the digital table, sharing stories, exploring the depths of our faith, and fostering a sense of togetherness that extends beyond the walls of our church. Get ready for engaging conversations, heartfelt moments, and a deeper understanding of what it means to be a part of Collinsville Baptist Tabernacle. Thank you for tuning in to Tabernacle Talks. Let's begin this extraordinary journey together. On today's episode, we are joined by Brother Zane Edwards, missionary to New Zealand. And Brother Edwards, thank you so much for joining us today on the Tabernacle Talks podcast.
Well, thank you, Pastor. It's good to be here with you.
Brother Edwards and his wife, Miss Cindy, are with us this year at our annual missions conference and got to meet them yesterday for the first time in person and have really enjoyed getting to know them a little bit better so far and super excited to be able to share this conversation with you on today's episode. Brother Zane, want to go ahead and jump right into the questions that I sent you earlier and let our folks get to know you a little bit better as well. To start off, could you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a missionary in New Zealand? What was it that motivated you to go down this path, and how did your mission work in this kind of unique setting actually get started?
Well, I went into ministry back in 1976 in the States here, and I did youth work and children's ministry and pastoring. I ended up becoming the pastor of Westside Baptist Church in Emporia, Kansas, where I was the youth minister, and the pastor went to start a work up in Washington, so the church called me. I've always been involved in missions. I grew up with faith missions, faith promise missions. I married a missionary's daughter, my wife. She was raised in the Middle East in Beirut, Lebanon. Her parents were missionaries there for 35 years. We actually went over there the summer to get married and spent some time working on the field there, helping run youth camps and things like that. My experience overseas wasn't all that great. I ended up getting hepatitis, and that was rough on me. And when I got back, because I'm a homegrown American, born in the South, lived in Kansas and Oklahoma. So when we got back to the States, I always tell this in my testimony, I got off that plane and landed in America, and I said to myself and my wife, I said, I am never leaving this country again. I don't know if God laughed at that time, but I know He had in mind what was going to take place in my life. But I've always been involved in missions, and the church I pastored was celebrating 50 years, and I was concerned and burdened about the fact that here was a church 50 years old, and other than one other individual that surrendered to missions, the church had never produced. The Lord had never called out of that church a missionary. So we have our mission conference every year, just like every church. And my prayer was not only that we reach our goal or the money to do missions, but my prayer was, God, call someone. We want to send someone from this church. And He decided He would. And so it was me. It came to me and just really spoke to my heart about why not you? And I thought, well, I've already said I don't want to leave this country. I'm pretty happy here. I'll just keep sending and doing that. But for about a year, the Lord really burdened my heart about New Zealand. To be honest, I didn't even know where New Zealand was. I was not the best of students in geography and world history, so I had to look it up. And I found it and began to study and to look at the country and what its needs were. Began to look at missionaries that were down there. And actually, that year I had scheduled a missionary, and I didn't really realize. I knew he was from the South Pacific. And I was thinking Australia when he got there. Brother Brad Hastings said, no, I'm from New Zealand. I thought, well, the Lord's putting some of this stuff together. And so after about a year and spending some time with my wife, praying about this and talking about this, we really felt like that God was calling us to the field of New Zealand. And so it's in 1992, I resigned the church there as the pastor. We began our journey and we arrived in New Zealand October the 5th, 1994.
Wow. So I'm curious, growing up on the mission field, how did your wife feel when you first came to her with this leading of the Lord that he was calling you to missions?
Well, she'll testify to the fact that she was not excited about it. Okay, wow. She felt like she had spent, her years in service for the Lord, and we were in a church there that had just decided to sell the parsonage and give us the money to get our own home. She was excited about that. Our kids were in school. My son was playing baseball, starting third baseman for a 6A high school. We're very, very comfortable there. So she was not real excited, and she'll tell you that. And so one day, after about a year of just sharing with her on different times, I really feel the Lord's dealing with us. We were headed to Wichita to a wedding, Wichita, Kansas. And on the interstate there, my wife looked at me and said, okay, Zane, the joking, the kidding, we've got to make a decision. What do you feel God is doing in our life? And she said, I don't necessarily remember it, but she said, I looked at her and I said, Cindy, I can't get it out of my heart and I cannot get it out of my mind. Mm-hmm. And she said, okay, then it's time for us to make that commitment.
Wow. So
at first she wasn't, but when we made that commitment, she said, when I said that, she turned around and looked out the window and thought to herself, my life will never be the same. Mm-hmm. God has got something for us.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about.
Well, I mean, it's. I hope our listeners don't think this sounds cliche, but I always appreciate and love when our missionaries come, especially when you can just sense the energy that they have, the excitement that they have, and as you guys at this point, I don't know when this episode will air, but y'all are getting ready to go back to the field. And you can just sense the love for the people in both you and your wife, the desire to get back there. And I really appreciate that. That's very refreshing.
Well, thank you.
I love seeing that in the missionaries we have.
Thank you.
Of course, probably most of our listeners never been to New Zealand, may not know a lot about New Zealand. But New Zealand, of course, known for beautiful scenery. Also, we discussed this before, but is it the Maori?
The Maori
people. Have you been able to minister much in their people group? Can you share a little bit of the culture that they have, the experiences that you have gained while working with them? How have they influenced your work there in New Zealand?
All right, the Maori people are the indigenous people. New Zealand became a European a whaling station, actually. Captain James Cook went down there. And then following that came missionaries, and they began to work in New Zealand. The Maori population only makes up about, 13-14% of the population now. And there are no pure Maori left. The last one, the Queen, died several years ago. So they have mixed now. They're all mixed with the Europeans and the Pacific Island community, which is very big there. The Samoan, there are more Samoans in New Zealand than there are in Samoa. So the Maori and the Samoan, both kind of a Polynesian descent, they have mixed cultures there. The Maori had a form of religion, more. There's a god of water, a god of the earth, a god of this, and there was more of that before the Europeans came. But in 1820, with the Europeans coming, they did enter into the more form of Christianity that we know. There is a move now because the Maori see their nationality kind of disappearing and mixing and everything. There's a real move now to have Maori schools for the kids, and in that they are beginning to teach the old way, and I think it's kind of a response against colonialism and colonizing of the people. I've had some of them say that's an American, that's a European religion that you've bought here. We want to go back to our roots. Now, I don't think it's real big. The Maori language is spoken by some, but it's not the predominant language anymore. So they have their own culture. We actually, where we were at, our church the one church that we were involved in, probably was more Samoan, 85% Samoan. And then we did have some Maori in the church. But, in dealing with cultures, they have some beautiful aspects of it. They do love the family. Family is important. Leadership in the family is important. The land is beautiful. And to some degree, there's a quote by doing my slide presentation where a person is interviewed about New Zealand and why religion doesn't really fit with most of them anymore, because only 38% of the New Zealanders profess any type of Christianity. And part of it comes from the beauty of nature, their nature, worshiping the creation more than the creator.
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of deal with that because, we love the earth. God gave it to us, made us stewards over it. And so there is that aspect of it. So, you have to look at the cultures and sort through what can fit with Christianity and what crosses the line.
Yes.
And that's where you have to teach them and work with them to understand, okay, this is a beautiful creation. You have a beautiful country, but it did not just get here.
Right.
There's a creator God over all of this. So you have to just teach them that.
So what if Christianity is only accounting for about 38%? What is the major religion in New Zealand? Is there a major religion?
Well, if you look at surveys, most of them will say it's the Anglican Church, which is the Church of England, because they colonized, New Zealand. They're not a growing group. They're kind of a dying group as well, because Christianity as a whole is just dying off down there. The fastest growing religion in New Zealand, believe it or not, is Hinduism. And I think part of that comes from the fact that we have a large Indian from India population there, and they're building their own temples and their own places of worship. It's not the largest, but it is growing very rapidly. And that's a pantheistic type, religion where, again, sort of fits with the old traditional Maori. There's a God for this, God for that. Everything is a God in its own sense, and we have to show respect to that God. So
yeah, okay, wow. Any church ministry, missions, local here in the States, is going to rely heavily on community relations. I mean, we're not a commune here. We're not a walled off city. We're supposed to be out, going into the highways and the hedges, compelling them to come in. So what are the communities like in New Zealand? I mean, are they very Americanized, or do they have their own flavor? What kind of community outreach are you able to have there in New Zealand? And have you had any stories of success during your times there?
Yeah, New Zealand is a very modern country. New Zealand does not have a lot of poverty. It's a socialized country, so they try to keep everybody, kind of on the same plane. So there's a lot of government support. The church that I was originally a part of there, and from there we started these other churches, was in an area that when the missionary built the church, there was nothing there. It was just what they call paddock or pasture land. But when they imported the Samoans to come for cheap labor into New Zealand, is all it was. They needed cheap labor for the factory, unskilled. They bought a lot of Samoans and gave them citizenship and let them come in. Well, that was great until the factories all left. Now we've got a lot of unemployed older Samoan and Pacific Island communities. So the government came in and built housing all around the church as far as you could see.
Wow.
So the church began to shift from being a more white European community, which they had about 70 people, to more of an island. Now that happened under our ministry there. Because the white Europeans were driving in, but they're leaving and not involved in the community. When we got there, we actually lived on the property, and we got involved with the community. We had a church hall that the missionary had built, which stayed locked most of the time. But down where we lived, there was a lot of kids that walked the streets all the time. Not the violent gangs, maybe, but they called them gangs. Well, we started every night opening up our gymnasium. And we had front doors. We opened them up. We set up volleyball. We would start playing volleyball. Kids would walk by the community. They'd come look, see what's going on. We encouraged them to come in. They come in and play volleyball. Well, then next thing, they would show up on Friday night to our youth activities that we had on our Bible study in youth club on Friday night. And then from there, we'd see them come Sunday morning. We see them get saved. So at one point, the church, and I'm not saying white, but the white Europeans wanted to fence off the church. They wanted to put gates up. And I said, no, we're in this community. This needs to be an open door. People do not need to feel like you have to be somebody to come in here. And so we never did put up a gate. The interesting part of that is graffiti is very popular in our, with the people. But our church hardly ever got graffitied.
Wow.
Hardly ever. Because it began to be respected. People in the community knew us and what we were doing. So very much involved in the community and opening up the church and just saying, come as you are. Mm-hmm. We also were privileged as the church grew, because as we said, we had over 600 come to Christ. The church grew to about 300. And as the church grew, the community began to recognize us. So we had the privilege, one of the schools in the area, you talk about being involved with community, one of the schools in the area that some of our young people had gone through elementary school, came to us and said, would you like to have a class in our school, to teach? We said, well, yeah, any limitations? No. Just want you to come in, develop a program. Their school system runs 10 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 10 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So what ended up happening, to make the long story short, is every 10 weeks we got 40 new students. We developed a program, a series of lessons called Options, because suicide and premarital sex and children out of wedlock was very prominent in the culture there. And so every 10 weeks, we got 40 students. We'd take a team into the school, and we would do games. We'd teach them how to make proper decisions. And, of course, another one of those decisions is Christ.
Yes.
Okay,
Amen. And
we were free to do that. So, again, that just grew in the community, and people knew who we were.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so you've seen both sides. You've been a pastor here in the States. You're a missionary in New Zealand. When you think about the community outreach that you have been able to engage in New Zealand, what kind of lesson can the churches in America learn from, what I feel like is very often the context in which missionaries are ministering? As America becomes more post-Christian, how can we adapt or adopt some of these practices here in the States to where, we can see some of the same fruit like you're seeing in New Zealand?
All right. I think, again, looking for places where we can be involved. Mm-hmm. in the community, especially as pastors and leadership in the church, that, like you say, we don't get caught up in all the things we do here in our buildings, but there's a lot of good events that take place in the community, and we were involved in that. If they had a big Polynesian festival, we were there. We had kids participating, but at the same time, you're meeting other people, and they're seeing you express a desire for the things that they love, And I think that's one of the things that we can do here. I remember in Kansas, as I pastored, my wife and I were talking the other day, we were at the ball fields all the time. Of course, our kids played, but we had a lot of young people in the church that played. So we were at the ballpark. We were doing things. I went to the school board meetings. I was involved, in things like that. And the church needs to, I think, be involved in the community, not just the, for lack of a better word, the Christian things that the community do, but if they're having a huge garage sale downtown, we put up a booth there. We go. We're present so that people begin to see that we're normal. We love the community just like you do. We want to see the community succeed.
Right.
And again, that just builds rapport, builds relationships, which again is so important in our work that we do as ministers of the gospel.
Well, I would imagine too. I mean, you talk about going to like a Polynesian festival. I would imagine there were probably some things there that you would not support. You would not be, having take place in your church building. But that's where your community is.
Right.
And so you were going to make sure that your church was present there representing the truth.
Right. And as like I said with the cultures, we have the Samoan culture, we have the Kiwi culture, we have the Maori culture. And there were times when we would have to look at something and I'd have to say, now this probably crosses the line with our Christianity. Mm-hmm. And so we can honor this, but we're going to have to pass on that. I remember a young Maori boy, Clifford, came to us and accepted the Lord. Now he pastors a church of about 300 down there. Wow. And I remember the first time he preached. Okay, we've got him in school, we're training him, and I said, okay, Brother Cliff, it's your turn to preach. Well, he showed up, and he's Maori, and he showed up with all these kind of Maori carvings and stuff on his neck, which brings about a lot of their religious side of their culture. So I pulled him aside and I said, Brother Cliff, I said, let me ask you this. I said, when you go into that pulpit, are you going to be representing your Maori culture or are you going to be representing Christ? And he said, well, I'm in the pulpit, I'm representing Christ. I said, then why are you drawing so much attention to your culture? I said, not that your culture is bad, but in the pulpit, I don't want people to see me, and this is a young man we're training. Yeah. And he goes, you know what, Pastor, you're right. Mm-hmm. And so those lines you draw, which I never dealt with it like this black, this is why, Brother Cliff. This is why I dealt with some other situations like that, by bringing them into the conversation, talking with them. And if I had to share scripture and stuff like that, bringing them to the point of realizing, okay, this part is good. Polynesian culture and the Polynesian festival, yes, there were some areas there that we didn't want to go to because of some of the Polynesian dancing and the dress and stuff like that. So we just go to the other places and visit with people. Yeah, so.
Well, I mean, you
balance.
Yes, absolutely. You talk about sports in America, and I know one pastor shared with me one time that, he'd been in the habit of, kind of poking fun at the opposing teams, and one day he showed up and there was a bumper sticker stuck to the pulpit for the other team, and he said, you know what, I think we may have crossed the line here.
Yeah, that's true.
You've already kind of referenced or alluded to it, but New Zealand has undergone a lot of social and demographic changes over the years. How have these changes affected your missionary efforts, and how have you adapted to the evolving needs of the people that you serve?
There are a lot of the different island groups, which all have different languages, and so within the church, we always talk to them about the different language, because we're bringing cultures together. They're similar, but yet they're different. There's a little bit of animosity between the different. So when you come into the church, that was one of the things that we worked really hard on in the church, is realizing that you may be Samoan, you may be Tongan, you may be an American, you may be Maori, but you've come to Christ. You are His family now. And so we have to work on that unity. There was a little bit, when I first got there, a little bit of a problem with the languages in the church. Actually, the group that was there that left, they forbid the different languages to be spoken in the church. They actually said no. So again, looking at this in a more practical way, I don't want to deny their language. Okay? That's part of them. That's who they are. So I simply sat down with the church and I said, okay, if you two are speaking Samoan, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if I step into the conversation, we have to switch to what we all understand, and we switch to the English language, which is the common language of the day. Mm-hmm. And so there again, it's working with those cultures, making them understand each culture is diverse. It's got its own good. It's got its own bad. But when you come to Christ and we come into this church building, we are one together. American culture is creating a little bit of an issue in New Zealand with the church works. Because when we were there in 94, we always said New Zealand was about 10 years behind America in the way things were taking place in society. I mean, we would have 150 when we first got there in church and only have 7 or 8 cars there. Because they walked from the community. They couldn't afford cars. They didn't have jobs and things like that. And now you go, and I was back there in January, February, and I'm looking at these cars these kids are driving. And, so I say all that to say, in America, we compete with a lot of the prosperity, the sports, everything that's going on, which we did not have to compete with in the beginning there. As we look at it now, we are having to look at scheduling and how do you do this and how do you encourage them to be involved in rugby but yet keep the balance of church in place where rugby doesn't become the god. And that's very difficult in New Zealand because rugby is, they call them a passionless people. They're just kind of, stoic. But when it comes to rugby, you better stay out of the way. They are passionate about that. So some of the American influence, we didn't have American TV and everything down there, and so we have all that now. We have a lot of the fast food places. So we're beginning to deal with the same things down there of busy, work to make money. And that, for some reason, kind of spills over into people's time for church and things like that. So
now, Brother Edwards, many of our listeners might be interested in pursuing missionary work or some kind of similar service-oriented endeavors, some kind of missionary work. What advice or insight would you give to them, give to those individuals that are considering missionary service, whether that be in New Zealand, and maybe you want to make an appeal for people to consider New Zealand, or in other culturally diverse locations?
I think the main part of that is we just have to be open to the leadership of the Lord. People ask, how did you get to New Zealand? Why did you choose New Zealand? I did not choose New Zealand. The Lord directed me that way and gave me that call. So I even had somebody tell me one time, well, if it doesn't work out to go to New Zealand, what's your backup plan? I said, I don't really have a backup plan. I'm really convinced that God has called us here. But I think it's just saying, as Isaiah, here I am. There is a need. You look around the world, you look in America, you look across your backyard, there's a need for the gospel. And we are called to that. In some shape or form, we are called to be witnesses. Amen. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost. And going overseas, it can be scary. You're up and leaving everything you've ever known. I often use the call of Abram, as my text to go to. Like, he knew very little about where he was going and what was going to take place, but he knew God had called him. And so it says he got up and he went.
Yeah.
And so I think it's saying to God, I don't know maybe where you want me to be right now. If it is the foreign field, Lord, show me. I'm willing to be obedient to whatever the call is upon my life. And then I think, God is not the author of confusion. He is going to give direction if you ask him. He's not going to leave you sitting out there, like some misguided missile, as Jerry Thorpe used to say of all of us teenagers back in the day, that we're running around like misguided missiles. No, God has a plan. God has a direction. When he saved us, that plan and that purpose is what he's trying to work out in our life, and he will let us know. So if it's a foreign field, we can always use help. I also encourage short-term missions. If you're seeking where God may want you to be, you feel led to come to New Zealand. It's an English-speaking country, so it makes it very easy to come down. Getting temporary permits to get in the country is not that difficult. Come, see, is this where God is leading you, or if it's another country? Make contact with the missionaries. Start communicating with those missionaries. As we did, we tried to research the country. What is its religious status? What are they like? And so I'm convinced God will show you.
Amen.
And so we're just needing to say, here I am.
Amen.
Send me.
Well, Brother Edwards, I sure do appreciate your willingness to come and sit and talk with us for just a little bit. Mm-hmm. And we're so glad to have you here at our church. And
awesome. Good to be here.
Looking forward to hearing what God's going to do with you and your wife in the future.
All right. Thank you. We're excited to be here and look forward to what God is going to do for your missions this year.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And that concludes another enriching episode of Tabernacle Talks. We hope you found inspiration and encouragement through our conversation today. Before we go, we want to extend our gratitude to our wonderful guest, who generously shared their story and insight. Your voice has truly enriched our community. We also want to express our deepest appreciation to the members of the Collinsville Baptist Tabernacle. Your continued support and engagement make this podcast possible. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Stay connected with us throughout the week. Connect with us on social media. Join us in our Facebook groups and let us continue to grow together in our faith. If you enjoyed today's episode, we invite you to subscribe to Tabernacle Talks on your favorite podcast platform, so you never miss an opportunity to delve deeper into our shared journey. As we part ways for now, remember that you are an integral part of our church family. Let your light shine brightly in your community, spreading love, compassion, and the message of the gospel.